Welcome to Latin America Review. I'm Camila Escalante and I'm in Nicaragua. Our guest today is Jack O'Brien, who's from Ireland and here in Nicaragua, where he spent some time with the Rural Workers Association, the ATC, and had some hands-on experience alongside small-scale farmers at the Agricultural Institute. He was also here for the celebrations marking the 44th anniversary of the triumph of the Revolution, which is celebrated each year on July 19th. Jack, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what brought you here?
Well, my name is Jack O'Brien. I'm a 24-year-old student, I guess you could still say. I did my undergrad in geopolitics in Trinity College Dublin, which is Dublin's where I'm originally from. And then I got a scholarship to study an environmental justice master's at the University of Michigan. So I've been basically I finished that at the end of April, and then in May I went out to Mexico and have been farming. Was farming in Mexico for a couple of weeks, and then in July just completed a mini internship with the Asociación de Trabajadores del Campo, who do a lot of work with campesinos and rural labor unions in Nicaragua. So I was here for all of July learning about agroecology and how it's practiced around Nicaragua, and also how it relates to the ongoing revolution and maintenance of the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. So that's a brief overview of how I've of I guess my timeline. How I've ended up here is interest wise is I focused a lot of my studies in on like anti-colonial decolonial theory and practice, and how that overlaps with environmental justice work. I've a particular interest as well in agroecology and in more revolutionary sort of farming praxis, and how that can be used to achieve food sovereignty, and how that can be also used for like ecological protection, and to advance the rights of rural people and indigenous peoples as well. So that's in a nutshell. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about kind of like the format of what you did while you were here, because I know that with the ATC you were able to visit the IALA, which is one of the, I guess, schools where people do field work, and they kind of like engage in like hands-on training for some of this stuff. And actually, I don't know what your experience was, but when I've been there in the past, they've had students from other Central American countries, young people, and they actually tied in with some political education. But I think you must have also visited some other farms as well. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, I guess IALA is an agroecological institute. There's several of them all over Latin America, but the one that I visited was in Chontales in Nicaragua. And while we were there at that station, which had been set up in 2018, so still pretty new, we were learning about some of the fundamentals, I guess, of agroecology. So my experience there was learning a lot about traditional sort of Nika cuisine and life and how that's grown. And then we were shown some more kind of like experimental agroecology. And I mean, the whole point of that in a way was on one end to show that site, the Yala in Chontales, sort of functioned as this sort of experimentation site for agroecologists, that they could kind of do a show and tell. Showing these kind of new techniques in agroecology, which they had been experimenting with and practicing there to increase crop abundance, and reduce the amount of inorganic fertilizers or artificial methods of growing their crops, and experimenting with that, and then basically showing it to local campesinos and farmers to be like, you can increase your income, you can increase the food that you produce whilst not necessarily having to whilst also improving the ecological abundance of the environment that you're caring for. And for a lot of campesinos, this is second nature. This is a lot of what they practice already. But I guess since the Green Revolution in Nicaragua anyway, with kind of the intensification of agro industry and agriculture generally in the country, sort of Yala is trying to push some of farmers who themselves have been pushed into more intensive industrial commercialized agriculture back into more ecologically friendly and more in the long run sustainable forms of agriculture. So for me it was a privilege. It was really interesting being there, because we got to interact with campesinos and farmers on a lot of different kind of ends of the agroecological scale, ranging from farmers who weren't really practicing agroecology at all, but who had the intention of incorporating more diversification into some of their crop systems, to people who had adopted, inspired by kind of Ayala and what they'd seen there, had adopted some of the experimental techniques with great success. And it was really cool to see this, because it was I guess like a real world example of how science and also indigenous knowledge and ecological knowledge could be kind of like retranslated into increasing sovereignty of campesinos and farmers, and Ayala sort of as this like node of knowledge sharing, where farmers from around the countryside could come and experiment and talk and share. So in that sense, you could see the revolutionary potential of a place like Ayala, in moving away from agro industry and moving away from US imperialist food systems in the country. So yeah, that's a bit about Ayala. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that obviously La Via Campesina, the organization which the ATC is a part of, is promoting, on such a large scale and like in permanent campaign, promoting these different types of production using agroecological methods, and that they're so dedicated to promoting that when there's just so much endless pressure on these producers to begin using pesticides to be able to survive. What do you think would be the best sorts of ideas and practices to import?
Yeah, I guess a lot of the point of me being out here and learning is I have to keep this in mind, because I'm from Ireland. I want to return there with what I've learned here, to of course be in solidarity and continuing solidarity with the Nicaraguan people, but also always bearing in mind what I'm learning from these people. How is this relevant to my people where I'm from? How can this help them? And in Ireland it is, in the US and Ireland are obviously both more similar than maybe people would think. Very intensive monoculture agriculture in both countries, although it's different. In Ireland it's more cattle. In Ireland it's more the influence of the Common Agricultural Policy of the EU, and how basically since the 70s that's encouraged a rapid intensification, whereby grants are given to farmers in Ireland and all around the EU based on the amount of livestock that they have on their land. It's a very simplified version of it, but in a nutshell, that's kind of how it works. And what that has led to has meant that farmers with greater amount of livestock have been getting greater funding and grants from the European Union. So in terms of policy, this is obviously disastrous for small livestock holders or small farmers. So I'd say like even one. And this isn't original or new. People have had issues with the common agricultural policy as long as it's been around. But, in terms of where institutions like the European Union are putting their money, investing in a IALA type kind of institution in somewhere like Ireland, I actually think would be really beneficial, because I think that the basic principle of the kind of show and tell, come here, we'll show you, we're taking the risk on, here, of trying new things. We'll show you that it works with us. We'll share that knowledge. That principle of show and tell is as applicable as in Ireland as it is in Nicaragua. So, in terms of government funding directing towards that, in Ireland we have a huge problem with rural abandonment as well, which feeds into a housing crisis in our capital city of Dublin, and all around the country. And rural abandonment means that there's really lopsided land prices, and it also leads to more land being bought up by these bigger farmers. So to curb against that, the government has been seeking different ways of encouraging young people to come and live in rural areas to kind of revitalise it. And a lot of the strategies that have been pursued so far have been fairly unsuccessful. And I think from being here in Nicaragua and studying at IALA and seeing all of these young campesinos and Nicaraguan farmers who are my age, who are a lot of them from rural areas and are sticking to their rural areas and going to be employing all of their learnings in agroecology in their areas to further their community. I think that's a very viable strategy for a country like Ireland to follow. Now, there will be issues if that was like a government-led initiative, because we don't have a socialist progressive government in Ireland like they do in Nicaragua. But if funding was made available for an independent project like that, I think it would be really beneficial. In America, I was in Michigan, and I took some really brilliant classes on food systems. I took a transformative food systems class where we went all around Michigan. We took a trip where we went basically all around northern Michigan, visiting various small-scale producers, and they shared and talked about a lot of the challenges that they face, when it comes to finding, I guess, like funding, combating against agro-industry. And it beggars belief in a way, the amount of challenges that they face, because it is just so difficult to get funding from FDA, and getting funding from the FDA if you're a small farm is a whole bureaucratic nightmare and is very difficult. And the whole US food system is set up so that small scale producers are getting shoved down. In northern Michigan, you see this in a lot of parts of the rural Midwest, and this is mirrored in Ireland, of again this sort of abandonment of land, an aging population leaving land behind, and that land inevitably goes to larger landholders. So it's this sort of continuation of I guess hundreds of years of capitalist accumulation of land in that area. But there is really inspiring work happening, I know, in northern Michigan anyway, by very particular people who form kind of community and solidarity groups and sort of experiment amongst one another, and share that knowledge in that way. So there's really powerful sort of like knowledge sharing circles amongst people practicing agroecology in America, because that really is fighting a beast that isn't even on scale here in Nicaragua or in Ireland. But again, I think something like IALA is like a universal just good for promoting education, promoting young farmers, fighting against rural abandonment, and preventing the over-industrialization of agriculture as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that they tried to impress upon everyone at the EALA and at the ATC in general is just how important this is for everyone. It's not just a way of trying to sustain our economies in the global south or in Latin America, but that like kind of everyone in the world will have to at some point sooner or later adopt these sorts of methods, because obviously the way we get our food is just not sustainable, and that is seen right now in the way that since the special military operation began, that food prices, for example, in Canada, where I just visited recently, went up something like 30% in the last couple of years. And that could continue, especially if another sort of large world event like COVID happens once again, or some other intensification of the conflict. And so it's really important that, that these things all be adopted in some form or another. It's not the case that simply that the global north is benefiting at the cost of the global south, but actually working class people everywhere are suffering because of our capitalist mode of production, in a nutshell. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the other activities since you were here for July 19th? I know that you were with Friends of the ATC, and you guys went and saw some of the celebrations that were taking place around Managua in celebration of the triumph of the revolution.
Yeah, so aside from being at Ayala up in Chantales, we spent a week in Managua kind of during the whole revolutionary celebrations for the 44th anniversary of the Sandinista revolution. And yeah, like, so it was a pretty intense week and a really, exciting week. A lot of people come to Managua to celebrate this anniversary, so we went to a bunch of events around the city, basically talking to other people who were here, either in kind of global solidarity with the revolution, or more people who were kind of coming out of curiosity as well. I met a lot of people who, frankly, because of what happened in 2018 with the coup here, didn't really, and because of press misinformation, and because of how difficult it is to get accurate media sources on Nicaragua, a lot of people were kind of like, well, I'm just going to come here for myself and see it. And to be quite honest, that's sort of a big reason why I'm here as well, because a lot of what I read about Nicaragua in Ireland and in America was very critical of the Ortega government, and I couldn't really find very many good sources to counter that, but I knew that was the case also for Venezuela and for Cuba and for a lot of socialist countries in this or left-leaning governments in this part of the world. So I thought it was important to come out here to actually see for myself, and it was nice to meet other people in global solidarity movements. So there was one event in the Casa Ben Linder, which I believe you were also at, where there was it was a book launch. I need to remember your man's name. What's his name? Dan Kovalik. Yeah. And yeah, so he spoke a bit because he was releasing a book about kind of the history of U.S. imperialist intervention in Nicaragua. And then there was a lot of like really inspiring and lovely figures there who I got to talk to, or at least hear from. I know Brian Wilson was there as well, who of course during the Contra War he had lost his legs in protesting against U.S. imperialist intervention there by the Reagan government. So it was very inspiring to hear from him. And yeah, that was a really cool event at the Casa Ben Linder as well, because you could see with all these people from all over the world there, as visual support and legitimation in a way for the Ortega government, for the Sandinista government, that even being in Casa Ben Linder and knowing that Benjamin Linder was kind of one of the, I guess, early people who came to Nicaragua in global solidarity, that kind of trend has continued up until now. And yeah, it was interesting. That event also like was a lot of focus on Benjamin Linder, and again, like how the US, although perpetuating a lot of what's been going wrong in Nicaragua, there's also been strong solidarity movements from especially from the outset of the Contra War in the country. So yeah, it was cool to meet people like that. And then I guess for the actual celebrations, we went into Managua for that, and again, that was just a really good opportunity for me to just talk to other people who were on the delegation, and talk also to a lot of Nicaraguans about what they thought of the whole thing, because again, I kind of used this internship as sort of a figuring out process of, okay, on one end, what I'm hearing from Western media outlets is that this is an authoritarian, repressive government that has cracked down on any sort of opposition and since 2018, and that there's been a flood of migration out of the country. So a lot of what I was hearing was pretty negative, and then on the other end, when I came here, a lot of what I was hearing, quite frankly, was positive to the point of propaganda. So it was a lot of watching videos that were really informative, but at the same time, I felt like that there was a middle ground of reality being lost there. So it was really cool going to the celebrations and getting, with my limited Spanish, albeit, but like getting to talk to people about the actual state of the country. And a lot of people were, at these celebrations, very adamant that in talking about the improvements that the government has brought about, whether it be roads built, schools built, all in spite of, as you said, really heavy sanctions against the country, and the ongoing, for a lot of people, the sort of quadruple threat of COVID, of inflation caused by the Ukraine war, of sanctions as well, and also of climate change, and how that's for farmers especially, how that's affecting their productivity. So those events were great, and then I didn't get to go to Daniel and Rosario's speeches in person, so we just went to a local community in downtown Managua, and we sat watching the speeches there. And yeah, that's when my limited Spanish caught up with me as well, because I struggled quite a lot to understand what was happening. But it was good to be there again with people to talk about it. And it was also, again, quite clearly like an alternative sort of global alliance was quite clearly formed there. One that, even the kind of focus in the speech on Thomas Sankara, I thought was like, and the whole alignment and emphasis of the relationship between Latin America and Africa was something that was really, I thought, like a powerful and important idea, and something that's not emphasized a lot, because all too often it's just a unilinear relationship between global North and global South continent. But yeah, seeing people from countries like Burkina Faso given such like a stage to share their country's experience and solidarity with Nicaragua highlights that, like, so global solidarity isn't just about Americans and Europeans, and it never has been, coming here and bringing their lessons back. The real future of solidarity lies, and potential for the global South, I feel like, lies in those partnerships across countries, in opposing imperialism by the global North as well. So yeah, those some things. Yeah.
So what would you tell people, I guess on the exterior mostly, in your case, people in Ireland and your other students or friends in the US, I guess about what you experienced here with regards to like the most common claims that we saw over the last few years, or 5-6 years to be exact, calling this place, a repressive dictatorship, saying that there are limited freedoms, that There's a lot of restrictions on what people can do and can say, and those sorts of things. I guess, what was your experience with that, and what would you tell someone who was thinking about coming and seeing for themselves?
Yeah, like I never claim to be. After being a month here, I'm definitely no expert on Nicaraguan politics, but my impression from forming lovely friendships and having really profound conversations with a lot of Nicaraguenses here has been the emphasis on, and this isn't just with people who are hardcore Sandinistas. I've talked to like a lot of people here who emphasize how good, education. The education system is here. How like obviously free healthcare for like people is, I mean, a huge boon, and you brought up gender equality, and I remember hearing recently that I think Nicaragua ranked like 7th in the world in terms of like gender equality. I don't know if that was specifically in politics, but there's a lot of realms where Nicaragua is like excelling, and from around, like obviously like from spending time here as well, like it's a country with limited resources, mainly because of the kind of lingering impacts of war and of sanctions, and yet with the fairly scarce resources that they have, they still manage to command a really strong popular support, something that has survived the coup attempt and the attempts at of rallying opposition support as well. So what I'd say to people is that, I really would encourage, if you have the resources and the opportunity, to come to Nicaragua and actually to talk to the people, to see the country yourself, because people here are really firmly rooted, most of the people, in very in the same principles that started the Sandinista movement over half a decade ago. And that sort of anti-imperialism, that very much like, we're not just going to take this sort of like US global north led imperialism over us. I don't know, there's like a fighting spirit here, and there's a real sense of like national pride that like emanates here, that I don't think would exist in a country that is wrought by authoritarian repression. It isn't a tense country. It's a country where you can have very open political discussions with people. It isn't a place where I'm looking over my left and right shoulder for a secret agent to come and like put me in cuffs. It's not that environment. It is a very free, and that's what young Nicaraguenses were telling me in Yala as well. It is a country that people are proud of, that in spite of everything that's being pitched against it, it's managing to still have really powerful and effective public institutions. And yeah, like, I mean, it's the future of the country. I really I think it has like such a strong base of support here that you'd hope that it would be able to survive another 2018 if it were to happen. I think that solidarity between Nicaragua, Venezuela and Cuba has also been emphasized throughout my whole time here by people on the street and by people in academic settings. So I think also it's not just like a nationalist pride that people feel here, which I think is really cool. There's that sort of international solidarity in scope of all Nicaraguans, and it's been like that since the revolution as well. People want emancipation. They want sovereignty for Latin America, and no matter what media stories portray, if you dig a little deep with anything or anyone here on any story, like even the outward migration from Nicaragua, like there was no reporting in Ireland or the US that I could see which highlighted the fact that a lot of the reason why Nicaraguans were emigrating was that it was suddenly made incredibly easy for them to enter the US. It was sort of this magic. If you're Nicaraguan, if you're Honduran, it's kind of like wait there. If you're Nicaraguan, you're let in. And this was from a conversation I had with the campesino, who was telling me about all his friends who had gone to the US. So there's always more this story, because yeah, there's always some angle you're missing unless you're actually here and unless you're talking to the people. But in a nutshell, I think Nicaragua is a really inspiring country. It's a really strong country, and it's also a very free country. It's not repressed. It doesn't seem to be authoritarian. I'm not Professor Nicaragua, so I have not seen it all. This is a month of experience, but that's my impression. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us today and sharing your impressions. I think it's really good to hear from someone different. I obviously have been for a long time telling, a lot of my friends and comrades to come to Nicaragua. Even colleagues who love Nicaragua and have always supported the revolution haven't had the opportunity to come visit firsthand, so they just are kind of enjoying it and cheering them on from afar. But I think it's quite different to be here and spend a lot of time here. But I would especially encourage people from Europe to come see for themselves, because I know it's like a much longer and more difficult trip to make, but I think it's really important to have those sort of first-hand accounts and go back and tell people what your experience was. So thank you so much for being with us, Jack.